What's that ship approaching us? Pirates. In the early years of the United States of America, there was an issue with U.S. merchant ships being seized, raided, and captured. One such nation would almost cause a war over these seizures, this being France. Yes, the first ally of the United States was raiding U.S. merchant ships. You may ask yourself, why would this happen? Well, first we need to start in 1783, with the end of the American Revolution. French aid to the American Revolution took a heavy toll on the country economically, and this economic turmoil was one of the many different reasons that would start the French Revolution. The French Revolution would eventually lead to France being at war with half of Europe. Given the situation, the French called upon their ally, the United States, to help them out. On the American side, there was a divide on what to do. President George Washington had a firm stance on neutrality. Splitting party lines determined where you lied on the issue. Federalists opposed supporting France as it could cause issues with Britain, which they wished to draw closer to, while Democrat Republicans wished to support France and draw closer to them. The Federalists would roughly get their way with the Jay Treaty of 1794 with Britain, which was mostly economical in nature. This would enrage the French, who were at war with Britain at the time, which would eventually lead them to raiding American ships. But they never did this with their own navy. They would use something called privateers. Privateers were essentially pirates hired by the government with government protection. So legalized piracy, basically. Shortly after signing the Jay Treaty, the French ordered the U.S. minister to leave the country and let privateers raid American merchant vessels. The French ended up capturing 316 vessels from 1796 to 1797. In 1797, two important things occurred. One of which is when the Americans had started to arm their trade ships with guns to help fend off these privateers. The second was something called the XYZ affair. The XYZ affair started when President John Adams sent diplomats to France to help resolve this privateer issue. The French diplomats that met their American counterparts were John Hardiner, Pierre Bellamy, and Lucien Hauteville, which became known as X, Y, and Z, respectively. These French diplomats sought a loan, an apology, and a bribe from the Americans. This bribe would be given to the leader of France at the time, this being Marquis de Talleyrand. Understandably, the Americans weren't too fond of this agreement and left empty-handed. Later on, an American citizen and pacifist Quaker, George Logan, tried to negotiate a settlement with the French government on behalf of the Americans. In response, the American government created the Logan Act, which criminalized unauthorized diplomatic negotiations, which I find incredibly funny. Anyways, on January 18th, 1798, the French issued a decree that any vessel that included goods going to or were from England would be declared good prize. Or in other words,
it's free real estate.
This is the start of an undeclared war known as the Quasi War. In response, the U.S. Navy started to build up what little navy it had left. Why did the U.S. not have very many boats? Neutrality. You may think that the Americans would aggressively protect their ships, but you'd be wrong. You see, neither side really wanted a full-on war. The French were trying to defend their national pride, and probably trying to recoup some of their losses from the American Revolutionary War, while the Americans were trying to protect their trade interests. Yet the conflict continues. Anyways, the president was given the ability to authorize merchant vessels and warships to take aggressive action against French privateers. While Americans were trying to deal with the French seizing American ships, the British had also been doing the same. The Americans just kind of turned a blind eye to the whole situation because they were trying to avoid making too many enemies at once, meaning that the British and the French were doing the same thing, but only the British got away with it. The Americans would eventually employ their own privateers to seize French merchant vessels as a part of the Quasi War. In total, the Americans authorized 365 privateers during the Quasi War. The official U.S. Navy would assist with defending trade ships. One of the most important of these was the USS Constellation under Captain Truxtun. The USS Constellation was a 36-gun frigate that took place in the only two important battles of the Quasi War. The first one was against the French vessel Insurgents on February 9, 1799. Insurgents was considered to be the fastest frigate in all of the French fleet. That didn't really matter though. The Americans won that fight. The second was against the French vessel Vengeance. This battle was an intense night fight where the main mast of the USS Constellation took heavy damage and had to be repaired in Jamaica after the battle. After fighting, the USS Constellation came out on top. The French and the Americans would continue raiding each other's merchant ships until 1800, when the Americans sent out a new diplomatic position to the new French government under Napoleon Bonaparte. This led to the Convention of 1800, which ended hostilities between France and the United States. Quasi War led to significant naval growth in the U.S. Navy, which would help for the upcoming Barbary Wars in North Africa, and would be the first time the U.S. showed the world why you'd never mess with their boats.